In the last part I went over different titles of fall season which I continue to watch, but I'm not sure about their quality. This time I would like to focus on what I consider the worst shows of the season and the best shows of the season, as well as the rest that I didn't mention so far, like the second seasons of shows which aired in previous ones. But first I have to mention a show I forgot last episode, which is Yuki Yuna wa Yusha de Aru. Yuki Yuna was first something that went under my radar, because it looked kinda like a generic moe show. However, I picked it up the second I realized it was actually Mahou Shoujo. Not only that, but it was also directed by Seiji Kishi, the director behind Angel Beats, and was written by Takahiro, the writer for Akame ga Kill. However, this is a mixture for disaster if you ask me. Not only is Kishi a horrible director, because he just blazes through content and rushes anime like no other, but Takahiro is also a horrible writer, if you consider how bad Akame ga Kill is. Now, that all aside, the first episode was pretty good. The action is nice, they use CG well, and the soundtrack is also great. It really got this Madoka feeling, and that is what I was hoping the show would be, a Madoka-like Mahou Shoujo. But so far, the show simply stays somewhere between the ordinary moe school comedy Studio Gokumi is doing basically all the time, and sometimes action bits with a bit of drama. Also, as expected, the show is horribly rushed. I would still wait for my final judgment for when the anime is finished, because despite all I said, it still has the potential to be somewhat watchable, and you should pick it up if you haven't. Now, coming to what I consider the worst 3 shows of the season, among the ones I picked up of course. Starting with something harmless yet still terrible is Girlfriend Carrie, or Girlfriend Better as some might know it. I only watched 1 episode of it, which was enough for me to know it's not worth my time. There was probably never an anime I've seen which had so much nothing happen in the first episode. This is not how you hook me. The characters introduced are all so bland, there's no story whatsoever, and the slight Yuri undertones are not my cup of tea. It is truly a waste of time to watch this. Unless of course you've seen more of it and you can tell me anything of interest happens. But to me it was utter nonsense. Next up is a show which I watched actually more than just 1 episode, until I finally couldn't bear it anymore. Trinity 7 is a manga adaptation which was written by Kenji Saito, who also wrote a couple of light novels and mangas already. However, they all look equally bad. 27 is best described as Sword on a Line meets Harry Potter. So basically the protagonist is an overpowered awesome guy who gets all the girls and they live in a magical school to learn about magic. It features some overly complex magic system which is poorly presented in the anime, similar to that of Mahoka, so you can guess it's horribly boring. But the real focus is the fan service and the harem of girls. The story started out interesting, something about a real world being devoured by some evil magic, and the protagonist wants to turn it back for his cousin/girlfriend who vanished in the process. But the tonal shifts are jarring, the dialogues are juvenile and lowbrow, and it throws in random fanservice bits at any point possible. It is truly a horrible show and I recommend everyone to stay away from it. Even worse, and probably the worst show in a long time, is World Trigger, a new Toei show so they can milk up some more money from their fans. But the budget is so slim it looks horrible. This is a perfect example why presentation does matter. Even if the story and characters were good, which they're not, the production values make everything so bad it's unwatchable. The movements are stiff, the conversation flow awkwardly, and the artwork looks bad. Besides that, the story is generic just as the characters. Something about aliens invading the city and a special force fighting against it? Nah. Toei, please stop making anime. You suck at it. Now going from what I consider the 3 worst shows to what I think so far are the 3 best shows. But right from the start, I have to warn, the number 3 isn't all that good either, but at least caught my attention more than what I mentioned previously. Grisai no Kajutsu is one of the big hype shows this season. Among another hype show made by Ufotable, the remake for Fate Stay Night, Grisai no Kajutsu is also based on a somewhat popular visual novel. The studio which animates it is so-called Studio 8-bit, and has not made many shows thus far. One of its more famous anime has to be Infinite Stratus, which I have not seen, but from what I can tell is they are big on fan service, which is evident in Grisaya from the sheer amount of panty shots crammed into each episode. Now let's first talk about something obvious here. The show looks great. It has a very familiar look to something like Bakemonogatari, with the extreme wide aspect ratio, but also the character designs are somewhat familiar looking to the Monogatari franchise, which is basically where the whole thing ends. Besides that, it's a typical visual novel spiel. Protagonist gets into contact with different girls and solves their problems. So now, the bad thing about this. It's incredibly rushed, and I guess there are budget restraints, and it is all just meant to be a marketing effort to boost the sales of the superior visual novel, but still, it stands as a big issue, which is why I can't say this is a great anime by any means. However, it achieves that I want to play the visual novel, so I guess it is at least good enough for that. Number 2 and number 1 are a bit hard for me to determine. I honestly can't decide which I like better, but for the sake of having an order, I made an arbitrary chronology. Number 2 is Kiseiyu, or Parasite. It is one of the 2 best anime this season. Madhouse comes out of the gutter after all the horrible nonsense they were producing in the last couple of years. If you ignore the incredible Hunter x Hunter remake, of course. And finally, they're adapting something that is genuinely good. Parasite is a relatively old manga from the 90s, which I wasn't familiar with until Madhouse announced they would animate it. And it is really good. The story centers around Shinichi, a high schooler who gets assaulted during the night by some warm-looking creature which turns out to be a super intelligent parasite. It was after his brain, but Shinichi was able to prevent it going there, which led it to instead replace his right arm. Now he has to live with the extremely cold and analytical parasite he named Migi. Together with him, he not only has to simply coexist, but also fend off other parasites which cannibalize humans all around the place. The greatest strengths really are the characters. Shinji goes through genuine character development and shows actual reactions to events around him, unlike the detached and don't give a fuck types we see in modern anime so much. Besides that, it has really cool action scenes and recently became just better, but I don't want to spoil anything. I have great hopes for it, and the only issue so far is the soundtrack, which sometimes includes some whoop whoop trash music, as well as the horrible opening by the band Las Vegas, which also did an ending song for Hunter x Hunter. Now, number 1 has to go to Shingeki no Genesis. Not only because it's a fantastic fantasy show, but also Parasite wasn't able to win me over 100% for the best of the season. Bahamut is an original anime animated by Studio Mappa, which also created Garo, which I mentioned in the previous episode. However, Bahamut got way more budget and is also better in all aspects. It is finally a really good traditional fantasy show with angels, demons and dragons coming out of Japan. And weirdly enough, it is based on a smartphone game, which by the way I picked up, but it's not really convincing so far. The protagonist Faro simply is a blast to watch. He's a perfect anti-hero. He's a bandit son, a daredevil, and a lion, a thief. And that makes him so enjoyable. The rest of the cast is also great. We have as apparent arch enemy Kaiser, who yelled all the time when he sees him. Amara, a demon girl who's not just cute but has depth to her, despite her being a plot device. And the freaking undead loli you can carry in a knapsack. How awesome is this? The story deals with Amara, who stole the so-called God Key from the realm of heaven, and now wants to bring it to Helheim. Favaro lied to her about him knowing how to get there, and now is bound by a contract curse to help her out. Meanwhile, an all-powerful dragon seems to be awakening, threatening everyone's safety. While the story is all good and interesting, the characters really run the show, and I'm just running out of time to praise how good it is. I simply say, if you haven't picked it up yet, do it, or else you're out of your mind. Besides these fantastic shows, and the others I mentioned, fall season also features some second seasons of anime from previous ones, of which I'm watching 3, and they're still all really good. On number 3 of those, I have Log Horizon 2, which continues where it left, but it's still about economics and the characters, and not so much about the story or escaping the virtual reality. Because you have to have seen the first season, I'm not really going into much detail here, but I can say it is still good and entertaining, and also got some tension this time. On number 2 we have Selective Spread Recross, which simply isn't as strong as the first season because the drama just blew up a bit too much, but it's starting to get back on track again. While in Japan, I picked up the card game and learned how to play it, eagerly awaiting some matches in the anime to see if I can spot some cards I know. Sadly, the card game is really in the background, and my knowledge of the card game doesn't mean really anything, which I guess is actually not bad since everyone can enjoy it, regardless if they play the game or not. I'm looking forward to how this all ends. I'm not even sure if the season will be sufficient to make it a satisfying ending out of the franchise. But on the other hand, I don't want this to stretch into infinity like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or something like that. On number 1 of the second seasons, there's a new shining light. Hitsugi no Shaika Avenging Battle is a blast. I'm really digging it, and even more so than last season. Not only does it look slightly better from a production standpoint, but it is also more enjoyable to watch. I highly recommend anyone who likes fantasy shows with cute girls in it to pick it up. It has a decent action, interesting plot, and really likable characters. So this concludes what I'm watching this season. Everything I haven't mentioned is simply not on my list, so I can't really say anything about them, besides the show I would like to watch when they're finished, which are Gugure Kokuri-san and Denkigai no Honya-san. Both comedies, so I'd rather watch them in one go. Also, there's Terraformers, which is terribly... you get it? Terribly... okay. Which is terribly censored, and I only want to watch this brainless gore fighting fest without gigantic black circles and bars over everything. What the fuck is this shit? This is unwatchable. Now, what are your picks for the season? Which do you think are the best shows, and which do you think are the worst shows of the season? I would like to hear it. Also, am I missing something? Is there a good show that I'm not watching? If so, please tell me.